All 8 billion of us are doing metabolism at all times. This show is about learning what metabolism is, how it affects you in every way possible, from mood and mental state to performance and energy. We are all about fine tuning the human experience for you to achieve the best self you can be. And if you are someone who loves science, curious to know how your body works and how to optimize it, then you are in the right place. This is the HVMN podcast. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the HVMN podcast. And I'm your host, Dr. Lat Mansour, a PhD in physiology, anatomy, and genetics, and the research lead of Health via Modern Nutrition. And if you enjoyed this episode, go ahead and leave a review. And if you have any question, leave us a comment. And as always, we appreciate it if you can share it with a friend. Now, without further ado, let's get into this episode of HVMN Podcast. Thank you, Johnny and Don, for coming on to Health via Modern Nutrition podcast. Today, we have Dr. Don Raden, who is an expert at blending traditional medicine with understanding of functional and cellular biology to treat his patients. We have Johnny Kaufman, who is world as well as a national record power lifter. Can't wait to have this conversation. How are you guys doing today?
We're doing good. Thank you for introducing us, and thank you for the time to get to know us in our practice. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, we're doing great. Seriously, thank you guys so much for having us on.
Great. So before we, go on further into, what you do and all of that, let's introduce. Well, I'll let you guys introduce, Raden Wellness and your backgrounds to our listeners, and let them know why we're having such a conversation today.
Sure, I can start off. The Raden Wellness Center is a facility in the Chicagoland area, and our premise is focused on biochemical insults that lead to diagnoses, disease states, and symptoms. So if we look at the medical model, conventional medicine is focusing on diseases, symptoms, and pharmaceuticals to address the underlying symptom-based approach to treatment. Where if we go upstream in the biochemistry and we can identify objectively insults that are occurring on a biological level, we can improve the quality of the cellular function, so to speak. We can improve the terrain, we can improve the overall biology, which will then result in an outcome of reduced symptoms, diagnoses. So the philosophy of the Raden Wellness Center is upstream from the symptom-based approach of conventional medicine, trying to target and look more in detail at the biochemistry that's leading to the diagnosis or symptom.
I think that's a great approach because I think our healthcare system has been very much focused on symptom reduction and treating the symptom instead of addressing the cause of certain disease, especially chronic diseases. So please tell us more, and Johnny can share, his role in Raden Wellness as well.
Let me introduce him first because he's a superstar. What we wanted to do is we wanted to not only address those that are struggling with chronic disease states, those looking for wellness, but a big component of wellness is athletic performance. And we have Johnny Kaufman, our world record holder when it comes to powerlifting. And he's an individual who's been able to take his interest and excitement in the world of powerlifting and really make a statement for himself in the United States. Johnny Kaufman is a guy who's the most determined individual I've ever seen. And what I want to bring to the table in our practice is not only looking at biological objective data from a medical model, but how do we exercise healthily such that we don't lead to injury states, that we can optimize our oxygen utilization to get the best energy production, and how can we work in a level that allows us to achieve our goals. Now, Johnny Kaufman is a world record holder in powerlifting, and he has a lot of knowledge in that area of expertise, which can be utilized towards others that are just trying to seek health. So I thought it would be very important to not only have a medical model when it comes to well-being and aging, but also one of the major components of this is lifestyle. We incorporate athletic performance, we incorporate diet, we incorporate other lifestyle modifications that are just as beneficial when it comes to cellular health. So a lot of us exercise and we really don't know what we're doing. We go out there, we go as hard as we can. And the model of Raden Wellness is about not only exercising but understanding how we exercise properly, efficiently to improve mitochondrial health. So Johnny, along with some other individuals, have joined the practice, and we're incorporating biological measurements of one's physiology during athletic performance, such as VLA max, VO2 max, carbohydrate combustion. So when an individual, for example, is a Peloton, and the lady says to you, sprint, you know exactly where watts to be at in order to be in that fat burning component versus glycolysis, and we can lay that out for the individual. Johnny Kaufman brings a whole nother level of expertise in the world of powerlifting, which I think is a very important component to one's health.
So I couldn't appreciate those kind words more, and that's pretty much it. All three of these, there's kind of these three pieces, or at least the way I think of it, of Raden Wellness, where you have the doctor and biochemistry side of things. You have a big component of Raden Wellness that goes over just GI tract health and digestive health and really how to get the most out of your food and increasing bioavailability of what you're eating. And then kind of finally this performance aspect, and they kind of call like really work in conjunction with each other. And it's really nice to see it all coming to fruition. But this Keto-IQ, Don actually presented me the product like blind. He was like, I don't really want to tell you what this is. I just want you to experience it, because of course we see so much application in endurance sports like marathons and triathlons and blah, blah, blah. But he's like, hey, this guy, if anybody doesn't know what powerlifting is, it's a very maximal strength based sport. I might spend 6 months preparing for a competition, but in total, it's probably like 60 seconds of actual lifting of these 9 lifts. So it's very, very short, high intensity stuff. And Don just wanted to see how it would, work with me. So he told me to take a certain amount before, certain sessions, and just see what I thought. And I had no idea. I mean, of course, keto kind of gives a little bit away. But for a lot of strength sports and stuff, ketosis and a kind of based diet is almost like a little bit taboo. We're seeing like, hey man, we are fast twitch guys. We need, glycogen and we need glucose and blah, blah, blah. But I was so surprised to see, and I'm sure we'll get into it, a lot of the application when the ketones that you're using aren't being produced like internally, like the idea of having glucose and ketones in your system, and your body being able to kind of choose which one to oxidize for whatever best fits the modality of training that you're doing, is a huge advantage. So this has been really, really a treat to kind of get to explore, and something that's definitely opened my eyes.
This is an amazing story, because a year ago, we were just talking a bit earlier before we started recording, that Don and I spoke about a year ago when Don discovered Ketone-IQ, when we just launched actually, and him, being a doctor and having a wellness center and wanting to explore what Ketone-IQ was. And we had this call, and I remember very clearly that it was an introductory sort of going down the science rabbit hole call, where I presented Don with all the research so far, what we know, the safety, tolerability, efficiency, all of it. And you were right. Like my background was in cardiovascular metabolism, and I know very clearly that when it comes to fast twitch and when it comes to high power output, you are looking at glycolysis. You're looking at really anaerobic hypoxic environment where you do you make your ATP through glycolysis, and then you pay your oxygen debt forward. And it's interesting you mentioned that you felt the difference, because we just finished a study, our first clinical trial with Ketone-IQ with the University of North Georgia with Dr. Parker Hyde. And that was the first ever study on exogenous ketones in anaerobic exercise. And the results were mind-blowing, and I can say it now because I know this episode is coming out in March or April. So even though we're recording now and in January, we are submitting a manuscript in February. So I can tell you, have a little bit teaser, that we put participants through a 5K run, and then we put them through Wingate, which is 5 sets of 10 seconds sprint on the bike at 75% body weight as the resistance. And as hard as you could, we measure power output, we measure fatigue levels. And with Ketone-IQ, because they have access to both glycogens and or glucose and ketones, they actually had an improved power output all throughout across the board, as well as lower fatigue levels. And I've been using it without the data, just from my anecdotal feeling, I've been using it before my workout anyway, and then I use it after for recovery. The perks of being a research leader of HVMN and having free access to Ketone-IQ, right? So that helps. So I'm glad that as a professional, as the, national and world record power lifter, can actually, reaffirm the benefits of Ketone-IQ even in anaerobic exercises.
Oh, absolutely. It was night and day. I think the few really things that kind of attacked it for me, um, some of my sessions are 4 to 6 hours, right? If I'm using glucose as my, if I'm oxidizing glucose 100% of the time, there's a whole other nutritional component of intra carbs and things that I have to introduce at certain times to not really feel that brain fog and to really not dip in the middle of that session. My satiety increasing to a ridiculous degree. I don't get tired. I don't get that brain fog. NLRP3 or the presence of BHB inhibiting NLRP3, the inflammasome. I don't feel that ridiculous. I can get through things to such a higher degree with lactic acid rising at such a slower rate. I think there was a study literally at 50% the rate of it rising. So things maybe not even powerlifting, but CrossFit, where you compete in so many AMRAP events, meaning as many reps as possible in a certain amount of time. How many reps, can you do? Or strongmen, strength sports where you compete in these as fast as possible or as many reps as possible in a certain amount of time. This has such a ridiculous direct application to those sports that I did not think was there before this. It was very eye-opening. It's very cool.
Thank you. No, we are trying to reach out to CrossFitters and different team sports, especially with, as you said, it's high intensity, but they also have to do it for a long time. Like, for example, like rugby as well. It's like all those sprints, but you have to do it for 90 minutes. CrossFit, obviously, all day sort of high intensity workouts. So I know you guys just introduced a performance health program recently. I would like to go into more detail as to what that entails.
Yeah, so I can speak on behalf of the practice in regards to what that application is going to offer the community. What we're going to do is we're going to be using technology that will provide the consumer information about their biology as they're working out. It will give us information as much detail as their VLA max, their VO2 max, their carbohydrate combustion. But what this all leads to at the end of the day is mitochondrial health. So not only will we be using biomarkers during the test to look at this, we'll be doing ancillary blood samples that provide us information about mitochondrial health. Are you utilizing substrates efficiently? Are you having peroxisome activation to produce plasmalogens? Do you have lipid peroxidation because you're overexercising, which activates microglial cells? With all this data, we can then come back to the individual with not only chemistry, biological measurements, but what is going on during their physical activity and come up with a protocol that allows them to optimize their exercise, but also to improve the mitochondria throughout the process of exercise. It would be beautiful to be able to accomplish our goals, but also live a healthy life. And what I've learned in the early phases of this is that many of the athletes that come into my practice have very dysfunctional mitochondria because of overexercise, overexertion. What's happening? Well, it's very simple. Rather than ATP production, they're getting superoxides. Superoxides are converting to hydrogen peroxide. They're then causing lipid peroxidation, leading to microglial cell activation. Microglial cell activation goes to the brain, and we end up with X, Y, or Z diagnoses. By looking at this, we can start changing their exercise protocols such that they're not going to, quote, burn out when they're older and even when they're younger, so that they can maximize health, maximize performance, and live a healthy life. So we're trying to combine the two, both the aerobic, anaerobic threshold, VO2 max. The program we're using is Insight that the Tour de France uses to get and collect the data. We're then using that in combination with some very detailed intracellular assessments and then coming up with a program for that individual. What's very interesting, though, just by giving them Ketone-IQ without any labs, people are coming back and saying, Dr. Raden, this is interesting. I went out and ran 10 miles and I didn't have to lay on the couch in a brain fog after I ran. Personally, I was so impressed with the product, I take it on an everyday basis before I start work, and I'm able to maintain my brain chemistry to a much higher level than incorporating carbohydrates that I used to do every day. So I've been able to do more restrictive feeding patterns, which I know is turning on autophagy and cleaning up cellular debris. And it's a beautiful clinical outcome just from somebody who is working out in the morning. Post-workout, I'm doing my Ketone-IQ with my protein in order to improve my muscle mass. Then I'm able to go throughout the entire day until dinner time without the need to consume food because I'm optimizing my ATP using the Ketone-IQ. So there's many applications that we're using this for, but I think in the athletic world, our ultimate goal is to promote health, but to keep them optimized in their true athletic performance.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. And thank you for your kind words. And just for a disclaimer, Dr. Don Raden is not being paid by HVMN. In fact, if anything, he is paying us to buy Ketone-IQ from us and then give it to his patients. So this is his most honest opinion, and I do appreciate it.
In full transparency, I learned about Ketone-IQ through a Parkinson's conference. Mm-hmm. I was sitting at a Parkinson's conference, and a gentleman gets up there and gives a beautiful speech. He has no symptoms. And at the end of it, he puts up a video of himself 10 years prior, and he's shaking like a leaf. And it was very interesting to hear what his protocol was, because it did incorporate ketones in the early part of his day with HIIT workouts, intermittent fasting, restrictive feeding patterns, using some additional applications to improve lipid peroxidation, and he was symptom-free. And that goes back to my belief system that if we can go back in the world of biochemical insults and correct the biology, many of our symptoms can improve. And that's true health because it reverses the clock to a healthy biology. That I think is very powerful.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that because I want to unpack a little bit on what you just talked about in terms of cellular biology, and I like how you explain, the production of superoxide into hydrogen peroxide and all of that, and the generation of reactive oxygen species in general, and how that leads into inflammation and leads to diseases. Now, from the sound of it, the patients that you saw, I mean, they sound active, right? They are having that sort of ROS production because of overtraining. At what point does one overtrain, and at what point does that, because we know exercise actually increase mitochondrial biogenesis, not decreasing it and causing, ROS generation. So where is the cutoff point and the threshold where someone can train to that extent?
Well, Johnny could probably speak more about that exhaustion phase and overtraining. You can train productively, efficiently, and then you can overtrain, which leads to more superoxide production, leads to more NADH. You're getting more of those free radicals accumulating inside of the cell, which is leading to detrimental responses. And I think for a lot of people, they don't know if they're training well. They don't know if they're overdoing it. That's where we come to the table and say, let's see how healthy your mitochondria is based off the current routine you're doing. And they're pleasantly surprised to find that they are not healthy when it comes on a cellular level. So to answer your question, I think everybody's different. Everybody has different genetics. Everybody accumulates lactate levels at different levels. Everybody has different VO2 maxes. But to personalize it to the individual is really the ultimate goal when it comes to our practice. Personalized medicine is specific to that individual. I'm certain that there's those people that can go out and run sub 3-hour marathons and they still have lactic acid levels that are not accumulating. Their VO2 max is ideal, but that's not the normal population. And I don't think it's just driven by, oh, I pulled my tendon or I ruptured a meniscal tear. We don't want to get to that point because, in full transparency, if you can work earlier in the phase and not lead to that disease state and give them the measurements early on, you can come up with a good protocol that fits their needs.
Right. And Johnny, I'm going to come to you because our listeners would probably be interested to hear some of the tips and advice that you could give them. You know, if they don't have access to Raden Wellness and they don't have access to all these high-tech measurement methods, what can they do to avoid going into that exhaustion state?
So an overtraining state is actually relatively hard to achieve. It's everybody. There's very based on the individual. There are certain people who can really handle way more than others before reaching that state. But this is actually where I started with Raden, was as a patient. When I went in and got my bloods done, because I felt a little bit worse than I should have after a meet. Of course, after a powerlifting meet where you're doing things maximal loads, you feel tendon and joint stuff like he said, or you might tear a muscle, but none of that is really a sign of overtraining. It's bad positioning under super physiological load, or you took a weird step, or whatever it was. But like he said, looking at a cellular level, he told me that I was going to have a heart attack in the next 5 years. Looking at me and the way I feel, like, no way. You know what I mean? It's impossible for me to deduce that. But this is kind of the thing, whereas it's very much feeling based, but it's something that you should really be checking up on, even if you don't have somebody like Raden Wellness. Getting your blood work done and getting holistic panels done and not waiting to feel that, and not relying on physiological symptoms, but even mental. If I'm studying and I can normally study for 3 hours straight, and oh my God, after a really tough workout, or I started really stepping things up, I started having this mental fog after 45 minutes. These are things to go get checked, and just it's never a bad time to take a snapshot of your health. And then you don't have to get the bloods done at something like Raden. Well, let's say you have a full panel, you can call Raden from across the country, or something like Raden from across the country, and send them your labs, and they can take a look at everything and create a full-on supplemental performance on my side of things, and then medical protocol for you to get back on track, which is why I so heavily believe in the idea of a company like Raden Wellness, is because it helped me, somebody who initially was very skeptical about this holistic approach to things, for at least very high level athletes. And it really, changed my life, which is why I think Ketone-IQ, the biggest thing, and the number one application is for the most serious athletes, where I've had a lot of people think, oh, well, maybe this just helps, the average commercial gym goer or the average runner feel a little bit less, whatever. It's really for the guy, let's say somebody like me, or like a lot of my buddies who are going really hard and doing a lot of damage to themselves on a cellular level. If I can take this and do the same damage, maybe not before my session, if the goal is growth, right, where I really do want to be doing as much damage through glycogen pathways as possible. But we've seen in so many clinical studies at this point that taking this post-workout doesn't affect the reformation of glycogen and glucose. It has huge benefits for doing maximum damage while still being recoverable, and making that a lot more sustainable for the highest level athletes.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think what we have seen as well for recovery, not only it does not impact glycogen recovery as well as glucose metabolism negatively. Studies have shown that taking ketones for recovery actually increases glycogen resynthesis and also mTOR activation for protein synthesis. So that's why I think some people really like to do it after workout, just for that recovery. But also I think for as you said, the pro athletes, the people out there who are really pushing their bodies to the edge of to the brink of being broken, taking it before gives you two things, I would say. One is the just pure substrate energy, just from an energetic point of view for both your brain and your muscles. And then the second point is, as you pointed out earlier, the inflammasome, NLRP3, which is anti-inflammatory. And when you push your body that hard, it's inevitable for you to generate very high level of inflammation, a very high level of stress to your body and to your cells, and on a cellular level to mitochondria as well, because your mitochondria is working overtime to produce all the energy that you need in order to push through that hard workout. So providing you with that sort of preempted energy source, as well as anti-inflammatory properties, could potentially help you further down the line as well.
It's a massive deal. I think especially for a sport like the Tour de France, for example, when you're doing these things day after day, you're demanding as little inflammation as you can put on. That's why I was talking about it in powerlifting, right? You might spend a certain amount of the year trying to build muscle, and you're not trying to really test your strength. You're just trying to build more general strength to then go test it. In the testing phase of any sport, I see this as massive application, whether it's strength, whether it's endurance, or things like this. When it is the Tour de France and you have to go the next day and you're trying to put on minimal damage with maximum results, across the board, this has like very specific application.
I get to interview all these doctors, scientists, and cool people in this health and fitness industry, all made possible because of this podcast that is funded by the company I work for, which is Health via Modern Nutrition, or HVMN. And it is not that they pay me to do this, but I genuinely love and believe in the product Ketone-IQ. I use it every day before my podcast, before my workout, or even after my workout for recovery. There hasn't been a single supplement that can give me such a drastic change in subjective feel within minutes as much as Ketone-IQ has. For those of you who do not know me, I'm from Malaysia, I got my PhD from the UK, and my passion is in science and chronic diseases, and I believe it is all about transparency, scientific integrity, and about sharing with everyone so that everyone can benefit from it. And if you like this content and our work, please do support us by liking, leaving a review, or sharing with your friends and families, or even buying a shot of Ketone-IQ at any Sprouts nationwide in the US, and the first shot is on us. Just scan the QR code and you'll get your money back for your first shot. You can also use the code HVMNPOD20, that is HVMNPOD20, and get 20% off your first purchase at the HVMN website. Absolutely. And I have to say, like, I am so grateful that people are looking at holistic medicine or integrative medicine. Some people call it multidisciplinary, whatever you call it. It's like looking at health from a multiple angles, looking at cellular biology, looking at subjective feedback, looking at biofeedback, looking at biomarkers, exercise, sleep, stress management, all of that. I'm so glad that you guys are doing this, and I'm so glad people are more receptive to it, because people genuinely get improvement in their health. Now, we on the show, we always preach about, getting your foundation right, like get your diet, get your exercise, get your sleep, stress management and whatnot. And then you can put on the supplements, right? You can say Ketone-IQ, your multivitamin and all that. And I know that you guys also do peptides. Don, I'm going to go to you on peptides, because, this is a topic where it's, for people who know, they know, for people who don't, they don't, sort of thing, and not much talked about. What are peptides for? Who is it for? Is it safe?
Yeah, so I think peptides have a very misunderstood application for the body. What peptides are, they're naturally produced molecules, or peptides, proteins, that the body produces naturally. When the cell is working efficiently, it makes messenger signals called peptides. And those peptides have a variety of applications for a variety of different things. When the cell is not working as efficiently as it could be, those peptides, for example, can get carbonylated from oxidative stress, so you don't have active peptide. As you get older, a peptide gets released from the thymus gland called alpha-thymosin that involutes, and we don't have a healthy immune surveillance. But if we think about peptides, it all goes back to the cell. So these peptides are ways of exogenously providing the body the necessary signaling molecules to improve cellular efficiency, metabolic flexibility. There's a whole variety of peptides available, and they're used in a general statement to correct some of the insults that are occurring when the cell is not working as efficiently as it could be. So, for example, there's peptides that are utilized as healing applications, such as BPC 157. It's a gastric juice. It's produced in the cell in the gut. The most miraculous peptide that is obviously the number one pharmaceutical in the world is called semaglutide. Well, people don't quite understand that it comes from the L cell in the gut. So that has a reflection of one's healthy gut microbiome and the colonocyte. So when a gut microbiome is healthy, it releases butyrate, which will feed the fuel source to the colonocyte to make GLP-1, which will then go to different cells and receptors throughout the body to promote autophagy. That's what GLP-1s do. And the original research on semaglutide was not in weight loss. Diabetes was actually on Alzheimer's disease. So what does that mean? It improves the efficiency of the cell by using autophagy. There are peptides that are used for beta oxidation, and I like to use this in combination with the Ketone-IQ. CJ sapropirillin is a peptide produced from the gut, ghrelin, which binds to somatostatin, which allows you to release physiological growth hormone from your pituitary gland to then bind to receptor to improve PPAR gamma and beta oxidation. So let's get the substrate on board. Let's get the ketone. Let's allow it to go through beta oxidation to optimize NAD to NADH ratios. Let's improve that NADPH to NADP ratios. By utilizing these peptides, we have the ability to reverse the insults that are occurring, biologically speaking, to try to improve metabolic flexibility. So at the end of the day, what peptides really are is they're naturally produced molecules or proteins that the cell makes when it is a healthy cell. But as we get older, as we go through triggers, as we have infections, as we lead to immune surveillance weakening, as we end up with metal burdens, as we increase our carbohydrate consumption, we get imbalances in that redox, leading to reactive oxygenated species. And what I try to do is I try my best to objectify what someone needs and utilizes by objective labs, incorporating peptides based off of laboratory analysis. So I think peptides play a big role in medicine, and I think they play a big role in correcting physiology, and that's where peptides can be very helpful for the individual, given they're naturally produced proteins that the body's already seen before. They're not synthetic chemicals produced in a lab that the body doesn't know what they are. So I think that there's a lot of value, but I do think it's misunderstood in the internet world, and people are using this and this and this, and they don't quite understand it. It all goes back to cells. It all goes back to metabolic flexibility. It all goes back to redox. And my job as a physician is to try to correct cellular metabolism, once again, to improve one's ability to utilize oxygen to make energy, to keep the phenotype in balance and try to correct disease states.
And I'm glad and thank you for the explanation, Don. And I can say for myself personally, by experimenting with CJC ipamorelin, when I take it, I do get sort of hungry, right? Where it does increase sort of appetite, increase hunger. But what I really like coupling it with Ketone-IQ is that Ketone-IQ gives me the satiety and appetite suppression. But it doesn't increase insulin. So by not increasing insulin, you don't have IGF-1.
It makes them more sensitive.
Yeah. So it doesn't go against the effect of CJC and ipamorelin. So that's for me, what I just experiment with and what I understand about the science. I haven't really validated it, but I'm glad, Don, you now validated my practice.
Well, CJC, the ipamorelin component is what raises appetite a bit. It's ghrelin, and that's what's happening in the world of increased appetite. But again, if you're utilizing a substrate like a ketone ester, it can keep that in check. And by doing the combination of the two, what are you doing? It's synergy. So you got your ketone ester, you got your CJC, throw in a little bit of a HIIT workout with proper, application, and you got the full 9 yards there. So there's a lot of things that can be offered in synergy to really start helping people to correct all the insults that are occurring on a cellular level.
Now, for people who don't know about peptides, who haven't used peptides before, what is the means of administration for peptides? Is it oral? Is it injection? Is it different for different peptides? Say, for example, like BPC 157, which is for injury, you said. Do they need to inject it directly into the injury site, or can they just take oral in terms of bioavailability?
So most of the peptides, there are several peptides that are orally consumed, BPC 157 being one of those. Now, BPC 157 is a healing peptide, so I use it a lot for people with ulcerative colitis and Crohn's to help with the tight junctions and improving the integrity of the gut lining. There's other peptides, for example, there's nasal spray peptides. There's CMAX, C-Lank. There's other peptides that are beneficial for improvements of neurotransmitters, for example. So there's nasal. Many of the peptides can be offered through sub-Q, which is a little tiny insulin needle. I like that route of administration because it bypasses the GI tract in case there's dysbiosis or unhealthy gut microbiome for absorption purposes. Mm-hmm. I try to use the subcutaneous peptides as much as I can. There's also peptides that are used for IV. Cerebrolysin, for example, which is a beautiful neuropeptide that corrects insults to the brain for traumatic brain injury, Alzheimer's disease, reduces tau proteins in the brain. It helps with the glutamate insult that occurs, neurologically speaking. And that's an IV infusion that can be offered in a protocol. So the route of administration is dependent on the peptide, but in full transparency, I try to use mostly subcutaneous. Number one, because it's easy. Number two, it bypasses the GI tract. So if there is issues about dysbiosis or unhealthy organisms, absorption may be better using a subcutaneous injection.
Right. Thank you for the answer, because my curiosity makes me think most of these are being, say, produced in the gut. So why won't you just take oral oral administration and call it a day, because that's much easier than injection. But then you pointed out that if they have dysbiosis or any sort of dysfunction in the gut, then it will prohibit them to have optimal effect. So that's great. Johnny, I'm going to come to you and ask, from a performance health point of view, from an athletic point of view, what difference do you see between these peptides and steroidal hormones, for example, as PED?
So peptides, just because of their infancy, the fact that they're new, they are getting it has almost unlimited and very unexplored application to athletic performance. One that is by far the most explored and the most used. It is huge in almost every strength sport that I know. I can't speak towards marathon runners and things like that, but I can only imagine it's just as applicable and just as used, is BPC 157, just because it improves biomorph. It's kind of the one that we kind of all know is a miracle worker all around, right? Improving GI tract health, lowering cholesterol, lowering blood pressure, but really targeting connective tissue, which is the really big thing for wear and tear athletes in strength, tendons, joints, high impact stuff running. These things take real wear and tear, and it's these little things that just snap out of nowhere. If you can find a way to reinforce these, and like you said, through subcutaneous injection is really the most common use for it, just because you can inject it locally. Not that would have too much of an effect, but people just enjoy it, like putting it locally. It's a mental thing. But it has, I personally take it, and it has had absolutely the most profound effects on small issues that I'm having. Before I started taking it with Don, I was having major issues in my left quad, and that was affecting my knee. Most of the time when you have an issue at the knee or at the elbow, it's because of something that's, it's referred, right? I'm having an issue at the hip, my TFL is off, that's why my knee is hurting. So if I can take BPC and put it around the TFL, and that's going to get everything to just calm down, that's like the golden goose of athletics, right? That's like the magic pill that nobody really wants to talk about. Whereas you see on the anabolic side of things, you see a high androgenic ratio, right? Where you see major positive side effects. Yes, I am stronger. Yes, I am this. Yes, I am that. But you see major negative side effects where you see people's sleep taking a hit. You see people's tendons and joints being way easier to rupture under certain loads. People, you get agitated. There's so many negative things that happen with things that aren't selective. And with this high androgenic ratio, that it seems peptides can kind of streamline and take away a lot of those androgenic side effects. Like we were talking about with Ketone-IQ, pairing it with CJC, now you have something that, okay, I am decreasing ghrelin or keeping ghrelin stable while increasing insulin sensitivity for athletes that are destroying carbs, where a lot of the time that's what leads, huge athletes who are overtraining, who decrease their insulin sensitivity, into diabetes, right? And you have the same guy who's trying to, affect his insulin sensitivity without that CJC and Ketone-IQ, trying to manipulate that with growth hormone and insulin, and then all their organs grow and every cell in their body grow. There are so many. I truly believe peptides and the continued exploration of peptides is probably going to knock and put the majority of anabolics in the past, and kind of a lot of the problems associated with anabolics in the past.
Well, one thing to mention about growth hormone in comparison to CJC is that when you're injecting growth hormone, you're giving super physiological doses and you're not pulsatiling like the body requests. You're also using a specific form of growth hormone, and there's hundreds of different growth hormone derivatives that the body produces. So when you're using CJC, you're just sending the signal to the brain to allow physiological doses in a pulsatile manner, as if you're mimicking what the body needs to do, versus artificially saturating the receptor. And when you saturate the receptor with super physiological doses, you lead to a lot of problems, particularly in the world of growth hormone in comparison to CJC. So I'm always a proponent of physiology versus super physiology. There's a big distinction there. And I think if the peptides are naturally produced proteins and they're physiologically pulsatile in nature, your long-term outcome is going to be much better than someone who's saturating a receptor at a super physiological dose, causing all the complications associated.
Thank you. I think that explanation is very clear. And, I like that concept of physiological versus super physiological, because these peptides, for example, is called growth hormone releasing peptides. It just means it sends signals to your body to release your own growth hormone instead of injecting synthetic growth hormone into yourself, and therefore again, shutting down your own production. If anything, it does the complete opposite, even though both cases you're increasing growth hormone. So for you guys out there who are looking at enhancement, looking at optimizing, performance, you need to also understand from a biological point of view, from a cellular biological point of view, as to what these compounds are doing, even though both are leading to a sort of similar results. If not, one is better, but also make sure that your body is made for longer term, obviously.
Right. You'll get a long-term benefit by being conservative and using things that are naturally produced versus synthetically oversaturating receptors, which lead to a complication that may not be reversible long-term.
One last topic I want to cover with you guys is around psychology, psychiatry, psychiatric disorders around performance, and also with your patients. Like what, how do you guys factor that in? Because what we talk about a lot on this show is not only diet, nutrition, or exercise, but we also talk about the mental health state component to it, because we can't forget that side of things, because it's as important, if not more, that really drive our motivation, drive our mood, our sort of social interactions. So I'll pass the mic to you guys to talk a little bit more on how you guys integrate mental health into this.
Well, it's interesting if you look at mental health and its relationship to just general health. The number one concern for a lot of people is anxiety, which leads to insomnia. And I don't think people are aware that the circadian clock induces an enzyme called NAMPT, which takes your NAM and converts it to NAD. So during sleep cycles, you're actually making NAD. NAD is necessary for the sirtuins to deacetylate different transfer factors, so to speak, that are allowing the cell to optimize mitochondrial efficiency, etc. The other thing is that when you are in a catabolic state with excess stress and anxiety, you're destroying tissue and you're causing more problems pertaining to the immune system. So when someone has anxiety, their cortisol level elevates, which can cause a suppression of the immune system, which then causes a reactivated infection, which then leads to mitochondrial insult. For example, reactivated Epstein-Barr steals the machinery of the cell. You're getting redox imbalance. You're leading on a road towards mitochondrial inefficiency. So the psychological component is very closely correlated with the physiological outcomes that we see in individuals. And I think the number one thing that I would encourage we do as human beings is we're more kind to ourselves. And we realize what real expectations we have and what our real purpose is, and becoming truly proud of who we are as individuals rather than proving ourselves to those that don't really care about us. In the world of exercise, I can tell you one thing. Johnny has already won the tournament before he walks in the door because of his training. When I run the Chicago Marathon, if I get to the starting line, but I know that I spent every working hour preparing for this and my shoelaces break when I get to the starting line, I still won because it's the journey, it's not the goal. And I think athletes in particular always shoot for the trophy and they forget about the journey of life. And I think one thing I try to emphasize with my patients is the journey of life that we remember. It's not the trophy, the reward. It's the hard work. It's the hard effort. It's about the dedication. It's about the lifestyle. It's about, for example, taking our ketone esters every day. It's about getting on a proper sleep balance. And I can promise you one thing, if you could be looking at the journey of life rather than the trophy or the reward, life can have a better outcome. And Johnny can speak much more because he's on the spotlight all the time now. But I actually had texted him before one of his big events, and I said to him, Johnny, when you get up on stage, what I want you to remember is that should be the most relaxed moment of your life, because what you did was better than what anybody else could do, because you committed your life to something and you committed yourself to yourself. And what the outcome is, it doesn't matter. You already won, my friend. So go up there. The pressure is off. There is no pressure in that moment because you already won. And I think we forget about that. And I think it's something we all need to remind ourselves about. And I think that's a valuable tool to be trying to achieve.
Yeah, that's absolutely massive, and something that I think a lot of high-level athletes experience, where you have this ridiculous anxiety throughout your entire preparatory phase, whatever it is. Mine is usually 16 weeks of a mesocycle leading up to a competition. But the entire time, that's when I'm worried. You know, that last week is when, okay, well, now I get to enjoy the fruits of my labor, regardless of what happens at this competition. Looking back at the last 16 weeks, I can't be upset with, as long as I can look back and say I literally gave everything I possibly could and attacked this from every angle I possibly could to be prepared for this day, then how could I possibly be upset with what I'm doing, or whatever the outcome is? But when you're speaking specifically on how physiological and mental things and biomarkers kind of play in together, the only reason I bring this back up is because it's so applicable to when I walked into Raden for the first time and got this blood work done, when I was feeling so off physiologically. At the same time, my mental state, was the only time in my life where I had loved ones and friends and family members being like, hey, this isn't you. You're irritable, compared to relative to normal. You're irritable, things are off. We have to go check out what's going on. And granted, there was nothing wrong going on in my life. I just secured a few of my first sponsorships. I just took, I think, my first state record. Things were looking up. I was having a great time. My social media was growing. And when I went in and got my blood work done and realized that my cortisol was, I forget the exact number, but it was something like 6 or 7 times the natural healthy limit. What I'm doing overtraining wise, that destroyed my mental state without me even realizing it, which is why I think this holistic medicine, which has been, controversial over the past 10 years, and increasingly not so controversial, is so important, is people are starting to realize how integrated everything is. My mental state can very well, if I have school and test and I'm in nursing school, maybe I don't have anything wrong in training and maybe my nutrition's on point, but the stress that I have from school is raising my cortisol to a level where I can't physically perform. Or maybe I'm going so hard in the gym and doing all of this stuff in training that why can't I focus when I'm trying to study? It's because I'm raising my cortisol to such ridiculous levels in training that now it's affecting my mental state. So what I would probably say overall is to really make sure that you realize you're looking at medicine and your performance from a holistic standpoint, and it's just as important to be on top of your mental state as it is to be physical, because they affect each other like yin yang.
Can I just interject for 1 second? Because this term has come up on several times in this conversation. What I would say integrative medicine really is, it's biological medicine. It's looking at the biology objectively and defining what biochemical event is occurring leading to a disease and symptom. And I think the term integrative medicine has very poor connotations because people don't understand what we're focusing on. And if we can correct biology, if we can correct cellular metabolism, if we can utilize beautiful agents like superfuels like Ketone-IQ, if we correct the physiological biochemical insult, the phenotype of the cell remains stable and diseases do not occur. It's preventative medicine on a biochemical level. And I think the term integrative medicine may be misconstrued by the normal average individual because they don't understand what our focus is. And I think that's something that needs to be emphasized.
I think it's also the idea of the conventional medicine and the conventional model rejecting the idea of integrative medicine upon its initial, interjection into the world, and increasingly not so, as you have so many people getting so many amazing results from it and looking at things from this holistic perspective.
And I think the problem with healthcare is like you are telling them, I am not paying thousands of dollars for a pill that can fix me. Instead, you're asking me to do what I already do: sleep normally, exercise, eat normally, eat healthily. This can't be true. So I think that over time, now people are starting, to get it. And over time as well, we start to get technology that allow us to measure these different parameters. We can measure our sleep quality. We can measure our biomarkers. We know more about biomarkers. We have more continuous monitoring of ketones, of glucose, of lactate, or whatever. And that gives us more information and data than ever to allow us to understand our health. But not only just that, but also to allow us to optimize our health by using those data that I spoke of. So, well, thank you so much, both of you, to be on Health via Modern Nutrition podcast. If our listeners would like to look out for Raden Wellness and find you guys on social media, where can they find you?
You can go to radenwellness.com. We are located in Highwood, Illinois. We have ability to help people around the country that may be struggling with unknown diseases. We have licensures in all 49 states now, so we can assist people remotely if need be. But a lot of individuals that have been going through doctor to doctor to doctor without proper answers, maybe the answer lies in the biochemistry and not the disease. And that's where we can fill the gap for those individuals. I think another thing to be focusing on is Johnny Kaufman's career, and I'll let him speak about his Instagram page because he's showing some incredible videos that are just jaw-dropping to observe. And the dedication this individual has put to the craft and the sport of powerlifting is transforming that whole world. So I'll let Johnny speak.
Well, that is like the nicest thing ever. Well, if you guys want to see kind of the effects of Ketone-IQ, which I am using daily in my sessions, and I do have companies, a handful, 4 or 5 companies who do sponsor me and pay me to say things like this. This is not one of them. I really don't stand behind. I've dropped multiple supplement companies in the past and clothing companies and different sponsors I've had because I don't align and actually agree with their application like I thought I did initially. This is something that I was the most skeptical of by far, with the nature of my world being, so power and kind of old school based. And I had my head absolutely turned around. So if you guys want to see how it's affecting my athletic performance through my career, I'm only 22, so I have quite a long time to go here. You guys can follow me on at Johnny__Kaufman on Instagram, and follow my training while using this supplement.
Amazing. Thank you guys so much. And thank you so much for the amazing message as well as to how we look at health, fitness, cellular biology, aging, all these different tips and advice around peptides, difference with steroidal hormones and anabolic substances. It's been a great session, and I look forward to the day I visit you guys out there and do a full scan myself, and you guys can tell me how to optimize my health.
Will do. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.